That's right, friends. The stores are filling their shelves with all of the new Christmas merchandise. And as crafters, this is the time of year when we have to start planning ahead for Christmas. So to get inspiration for a new season of crafting, I've put together a mega video of all of my favorite Christmas projects from the past. If you're looking forward to Christmas crafting, make sure you give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss any of my future videos. I always appreciate that the Dollar Tree comes out with tubes of ornaments in different sizes and color. They're a little plain, so I wanted to give them more texture and I wanted them to fit my style. I'm starting with one of the medium-sized tubes of ornaments. There's 7 in this pack. I'm also going to be using one of these microfiber cloths. You can find this in the automotive section of the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use some scrap fabric that I already had on hand. I started by cutting out a square of the microfiber cloth, and I wanted to make sure that this square was big enough that I could wrap it the whole way up around the ornament. I used a small amount of hot glue and I stuck my ornament right down in the center just to make sure that it wouldn't slide around anywhere. Once my glue had a chance to set, then I just gathered all of that material up to the top of the ornament, and I used a small piece of jute cord to tie it together to make sure all of that fabric stayed in place. Now, if you have some of those tiny little rubber bands that you use for hair, that would be a good thing to use here instead of twine. I think it would actually make it a little bit easier to hold that fabric in place, but I didn't have any of those, so the twine worked for me. Once the fabric is in place, then you can decorate these however you'd like. I'm going to keep this one a little more neutral, so I had some burlap ribbon in my stash. I tied a simple bow and I just hot glued that to the top of the ornament. I also added in a few pieces of greenery and some berries. This is a really easy style of ornament to put together, and depending on what your taste is, you can change up the types of fabrics you use or change up the embellishments that you put on it. I also really like that I was able to use up some of the little scrap pieces of things that I had around in my stash, like these little pieces of greenery and these berries. Now, to create a hanger for this ornament, I just took another piece of that same jute twine. I folded it in half and I tied a knot at the end of it. And then I just separated the layers of the material on top. I added a pretty generous amount of hot glue in the center there, and I just stuck that twine right down in and pinched the fabric up around it so that it would keep it in place. Now for my other type of fabric, I'm doing basically the same thing, but this time I'm using pinking shears to cut my square out, and the rest of the steps were the same. I just gathered the material up to the top of the ornament, secured it with some twine, and decorated it with a few things that I had laying around. Also keep this style of ornament in mind if you need a hostess gift for Thanksgiving. I know that's right around the corner. I think it would be really sweet to create all of these ornaments in a style that you know a person likes that's maybe hosting Thanksgiving this year. And when you show up to their house, you can give them a set of ornaments that they can put on their tree. I know a lot of people like to wait until after Thanksgiving to put their tree up. So if they're getting ready to decorate, I'm sure they'll really appreciate a brand new set of ornaments for their tree. These wooden Christmas trees and this season's greeting wood cutout are an easy way to make a quick piece of festive wall art. I'm using 2 different styles of trees for my piece, but if you only have 1 pack of wood cutouts, that's okay. You can achieve the same type of look. I'm starting out with some green chalk paint, and I picked out 3 of the trees to paint this darker green color. Then I just added some white paint to the same green color to create a lighter shade, and that's what I painted my other 2 trees with. So if you didn't have 2 types of trees, you could still achieve this same look just using the same trees. You would have 3 trees in a dark green and 2 trees in a lighter green. And to make my season's greeting sign stand out a bit, I'm painting that with some red chalk paint. After all of my wood pieces had a chance to dry, I laid them out on my canvas so I had an idea of how I wanted them to be situated. I knew I wanted the two lighter trees to sit on top of my darker trees, so I laid that out and I only glued down my darker trees to start. Now I'm using one of the black canvases from the Dollar Tree. If you can't find these at your store, just pick up a regular white canvas and give it a coat of black paint first. So you can see here I have my three darker trees laid out, and I'm not going to glue down my other pieces just yet. First, I want to create some snow all over my canvas. So I'm using an old toothbrush here and some white chalk paint, and I'm just dipping my toothbrush in the paint and then running my thumb over the bristles, and it's creating spatters all over the canvas. It's a little hard to see at first, but I just kept working at it, and I kept moving the toothbrush farther or closer to the canvas to create different size spatters. So if I wanted a more subtle snow effect, I moved the toothbrush farther away, and if I wanted the snow to be a little bit thicker, I just held it closer to the canvas. Once I was happy with my first dusting of snow, then I took out my dotting tool and I dipped that in the white paint so that I could create some larger snowballs. Now, if you don't have a dotting tool, you could just use the handle of a paintbrush if you have one that's fine enough. Or I actually just saw a video recently, I think it was on TikTok, where somebody was creating dots using an unlit wooden match. So I thought that was a pretty ingenious idea also. After my snow had a chance to dry, then I was able to hot glue on the rest of my wooden pieces. So I had to be careful with the lighter green trees because since they're going to be raised up on the darker trees, I wanted to make sure I only put the glue where they would be touching the other two trees. And then for my season's greeting sign, I was able to add hot glue just all along the back and place it across the top. If you have a mantle or a coffee bar or bookshelf that you like to create a hanging garland for on the front, I'll show you how you can make a quick one with just a pack of these wooden snowflakes and some cardstock. A standard piece of cardstock measures 8.5 by 11 inches. I knew I could get 4 banner shapes out of one piece by cutting it in half in both directions, so I cut it in half long ways at 4.25 and then in half again the other way at 5.5. Now, a really simple way to create a banner shape is to measure up 1 inch from the bottom and put a dot right in the center of your banner. So since my banner was 4.25 inches across, I measured up 1 inch and I placed a dot at 2 1/8 inches. Then I just used my scissor to cut straight up to that dot. And once I had that slit cut, then I just cut from one corner up to the center and from the other corner up to the center again. Now, using a standard hole punch here, I'm just punching a hole in each corner of my cardstock, and now I have my banner shape. So I'll show you again here. To create this banner shape, I just measured up 1 inch to the center of my piece, which was at 2 1/8 inch. I cut a slip up to that dot, and then I cut again from each corner up to the center, and that creates my banner shape on the bottom. I really liked that aged look, so I'm using some Distress ink by Tim Holtz and an ink blending tool to go around the edges of each of my banners. Now, depending on where you're putting your garland, it will depend on how many banners you created. Like I mentioned before, you can get 4 out of one piece of cardstock, but I knew I would be better off making 6 that would fit better across my mantle. So I did make 6 banners for mine, and you can see the difference here between having just the banner and then that little bit of Distress ink that goes around the edges. Now, if the rustic look isn't really your thing, then just skip this step and make a banner. I chose not to paint my snowflakes because I really like how the wood looks up against the craft colored cardstock. And keep that in mind too, depending on what your decor style is, you can paint the snowflakes if you want, you can stain them, and you can switch out the color of cardstock that you use too to match your home's decor. Now I'm using some hot glue here just to hot glue that snowflake down in the center of my banner. And in order to hide the hole that's at the top of each of these snowflakes, I'm just using a sticky back gem and placing it over that hole. And keep in mind also, you don't have to use snowflakes here at all. There's so many different wooden shapes available at the Dollar Tree that you could pick any of them, and I think they would all make a really cute garland. I was just really excited to use up these snowflakes because this is something I can put up for Christmas and then I can leave up afterwards until winter is over. I'm using some white macrame cord that I got from Amazon to string all of my banner pieces onto. I didn't want to see the cord from the front, so I made sure that starting on the right side of my banner, I strung the cord down through the top and then back up through the bottom on the left-hand side. So you can see here as I'm stringing it on, it's keeping that cord along the back side of the banner and you're not seeing it from the front. One thing I want to mention, if you decide to use something other than macrame cord to string your banner pieces onto, just make sure that whatever you use to punch a hole in each of your banners, that whatever you're using will fit through the hole. So I used a standard size hole punch here because I knew that cord would fit through, but if I was using something thicker like ribbon or a chunky yarn, I would probably move up to a small circle paper punch instead. I really like this Christmas swag that I saw on the Kirkland's website, and I went to the Dollar Tree and grabbed a few of the mini Christmas trees so that I could make one for myself. If you've never worked with these mini Christmas trees before, they're pretty flimsy and a little sparse, so I wanted to use two to make this swag nice and full. They do have a little cap on the end that the stand hooks into if you're going to actually use it as a Christmas tree, but it's easy enough to pull that cap off. So you can see here, I started pulling apart all of the branches, and rather than trying to work them so that they form a Christmas tree, I'm pulling all of the branches towards me and fanning them out to the side. That way the back side lays nice and flat and it creates a fuller look. I am going to be attaching these two trees together, so when it came time to fluff out my second tree, rather than pulling the branches towards me, I was just pulling them out to the side so that it would make it easier to place the first tree on top. So you can see I set the first tree on top of that second tree about a third of the way down, and I'm just using some of the branches, since they do have wires in them, to connect the two trees together. If you feel like the branches aren't going to make this tree secure enough, you could use zip ties or pipe cleaners, but I knew I was going to add some things to this that would make it really nice and secure. And you can see here, as I started to fluff out that second tree on top, it is a little more sparse, but I'm going to be adding a lot of things to the top of this that would help hide that. And it'll also help hide the weird shape that comes to the top from adding the two trees together. You can kind of see where it indents, but once all of the embellishments are on there, you won't be able to notice. I wanted to create a little more fullness going down the front of the tree, so I'm using some red deco mesh from the Dollar Tree. I have a piece of floral wire here, and I just wrapped it around the top of my swag, and that's how I attached my deco mesh. I just twisted it on there, and then I started working my way right down the center of the swag. I went down a few inches, maybe about 3 or 4 inches, and I scrunched the piece of deco mesh up, and I grabbed another piece of floral wire, wrapped it around the whole thing, and then gave it a couple twists just to hold it in place. So this is why I said in the beginning that I was okay with just using a few of the branches to hold the trees together temporarily, because now I'm using the floral wire the whole way down the center, and every time I'm doing that, I'm making sure that I'm wrapping both of the trees together and also holding that deco mesh in place. And like I said, I just used about 3 or 4 inches in between each of the poofs of the deco mesh, and that gave it a nice full look on the front of my tree, and it also helped hide the stems that that ran down through the centers also. I'm doing a red and silver theme on my swag, but you could use whatever colors you like. The Dollar Tree always has tons of tubes of ornaments in all different colors, so this is an easy way to customize it to fit your decor. Now, I always think it's easier to bundle some of the ornaments together before attaching them to anything. So I'm using some pipe cleaners here. I just cut one in half and I'm adding either 2 or 3 ornaments to each pipe cleaner and twisting it all together to create an ornament bundle. This is a good tip to keep in mind too when you're decorating your tree for Christmas. I think it's a lot easier sometimes to bundle all of the ornaments together on pipe cleaners or even those greenery garland ties and then add them to the tree that way. That way you're not hanging them each individually. So you can see here I had 1 tube of red ornaments and 1 tube of silver ornaments. I put them all in a bucket just to make it easier to work with. And like I said, on some of them I grouped 3 together and on some I only grouped 2 together. Now this is where you'll see that the gaps on the Christmas trees are really going to start filling in. I took some of my bundles and towards the bottom of the swag where it gets a little bit narrower, I added the bundles that I had created with just the 2 ornaments, and I just used those pipe cleaners to twist it around one of the branches, and then I kind of pulled some of the branches up through some of the ornaments just to intermingle some of that greenery with the ornaments. As I worked my way closer to the top of the swag, that's when I started using my 3 bundle ornaments that I created, and again I would just pick a branch, twist my pipe cleaner around that branch, and then pull some of the greenery up through so that everything looked nice and cohesive. And I really focused on where that tree got a little more sparse towards the top of the swag, and I made sure that I tucked some of the bigger ornament bundles in there to help fill in those gaps. I am adding some Christmas florals and a bow to the top of this swag, so I only took the ornaments up so far because I knew the bow was going to take up a good portion of the top of the swag. But you can see here, once all of my ornament bundles were in place, it really filled it out and made it look nice and full. I used more floral wire to attach a few pieces of Christmas florals at the top of the swag, and then anywhere I thought that there was a little bit of a gap on the swag going down the body of it, I had these little silver berry branches on hand, and I did use some hot glue on the stems of those just to tuck them in here and there and help fill out that shape a little more. I'm layering together 2 different ribbons for my bow, and the easiest way I've found to do that is to cut 2 lengths that are the same and lay them on top of each other. I use a little bit of hot glue to attach the 2 ribbons together just on the ends, and then a little more hot glue to make sure that the 2 ends form a loop. So you can see here I got my 2 ends together and I formed a loop out of 1 ribbon layered on top of the other one. Now I do want to create a double bow for my swag, so I'm repeating that same thing again. I cut 2 lengths the same as the first one. I just laid the smaller ribbon on top of the bigger one, and I'm using just a bit of hot glue on the very ends to attach them together to form a loop. I'm using a pipe cleaner here to attach my 2 loops together. You can see I put them side by side, and then I just pleated them up accordion style until they were both cinched in the center, and then I used my pipe cleaner to attach the 2. You could use a zip tie here or some jute if it's easier for you, but I did want the pipe cleaner so that it would make it easier to attach to my swag. I also wanted to create a set of tails for my bow, so again I'm using the 2 different ribbons, and I just laid down one on top of the other and cut them both so that they were the same length, and then using that same pipe cleaner that I used for the center of my bow, I just accordion pleated the tails and attached them with a few twists of that pipe cleaner. As a finishing touch for the front of my bow, I took another piece of both of the ribbons. This was probably about 3.5 inches long. I layered them again and I just rolled them into a loop, and I hot glued that right to the center of my bow. I used the pipe cleaner to attach my bow to the top of the swag, and there was enough length left on that pipe cleaner that I was able to form a loop so that it would make it a little bit easier to hang. I've used these car wash cloths quite a bit in the past when I've been crafting. You can always find these in the automotive section of the Dollar Tree. So I wanted to create a stuffed snowman using these cloths. In addition to those, I'm going to be using some baker's twine and a few things just to create a pattern. I taped two pieces of cardstock together to make it longer so that I could make a bigger snowman. I'm using a burner cover from the Dollar Tree and also a small plastic plate to create the shape of the snowman that I wanted. You could look around your house, find anything in your craft room or, from your kitchen if you have some dinner plates, just anything that you have that you can create a snowman shape in the size that you want. I want to hand stitch my two snowmen together, so I laid one of my car wash cloths down and I laid the other one on top of it. And I put my pattern down and I'm just using a Sharpie here and I'm tracing around my snowman pattern. Before I started cutting out my snowman, I took some straight pins and I just put a few pins in around the edges just to hold the two pieces together so that it would be easier to cut out. Now I'm using some pretty sharp fabric scissors here, so I was able to cut around the snowman in both layers. If you don't have scissors that are quite sharp enough, just trace your pattern on each cloth and cut them out separately. Since I'm stitching these together, it didn't matter if they were exactly even. I was just trying to save a little time by cutting them both out at once. Now, like I said, I'm hand stitching these two together because I really wanted it to have that rustic handmade look. So I'm using some baker's twine here that's in a white and sort of khaki colored stripe. You could use anything you want here if you wanted to use yarn or jute cord. If you didn't want to hand stitch this at all, you could glue the edges together or you could just run it through a sewing machine. The needle I'm using is actually a needle that you would use for plastic canvas. It doesn't have a sharp point on it because the weave of the car wash cloth is big enough that you can fit a needle like this down through it. I'm trying to zoom in here and show you what type of stitch I'm doing. I don't know if there's a name for this stitch. I'm just going down through the top and then coming through and going through that same hole again. And then I move over about a half an inch and it just creates a stitched border the whole way around. Once I had it all completed, I left a few inches open on the one side so that I could stuff my snowman. Normally I would use some pillow stuffing here, but since I had all of this excess from the two car wash cloths left over, I figured I would just cut those into small squares and that's what I'm going to use to stuff my snowman. I got a pretty good sized pile of squares from the scraps on those car wash cloths and it worked out really well. It was the exact amount that I needed to stuff my snowman. I just made sure as I was pushing them in that I was really getting to the edges all through the head and the body of the snowman. Once I had it filled up with all of those scraps, then I went through and just closed the hole that I had left for stuffing. Now my favorite part is the decorating. I'm using this on a shelf in my coffee bar area, but the car wash cloths are big enough. You could make this almost double the size that I did and actually use it as a pillow if you'd like. But since I'm going to put mine on a shelf, I wanted to accessorize mine and use some things that are a little bit harder. They wouldn't be good for a pillow. So I started with some burlap ribbon. I like this ribbon because it has some gold trim on it, and I tied it around my snowman in place of a scarf. Then I'm using some of the berry bead garland that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just laying that on top of the bow along with some greenery and a wooden snowflake. You can decorate yours however you'd like. And like I said, if you want to actually use this as a pillow, I would probably use softer things for decorating, like maybe a piece of fleece for the scarf or add a little hat to the top of it, anything that's nice and soft and cuddly. But like I said, since mine is just decoration, I didn't mind that there were some pieces on it that were not so cuddly. I'm using felt to create the eyes and the nose for my snowman. I took a piece of black felt and I'm just using a quarter and I'm cutting two pieces out at the same time. I felt like the quarter was the right size for the eyes that I would need. And then I also had this burnt orange felt in my stash. It looks a little more brown on camera, but I just cut out a simple long triangle shape and that was going to be my nose. I used some hot glue to attach these to my snowman snowman pillow. And when I hot glued down my nose, I only added hot glue to the one side so that it would lift up a little bit and give it more dimension. And I also forgot to film, but I did hot glue 2 buttons to the front of my snowman as well. I know a lot of you have mentioned that you like to do paper crafts as much as I do, so I wanted to show you a really easy way to create a paper ornament. Now don't worry if you don't have any special paper crafting tools. You don't need anything out of the ordinary for this. I'm going to start with some double-sided scrapbook paper, and I'm just cutting it down into 2 by 2 squares, and I'll need 12 of these squares altogether. After all your squares are cut, just hold one of them in your hand so that it's forming a diamond shape, and make sure that the side of the scrapbook paper that you want to see is facing towards you. So in my case, I wanted the green side to show, so I made sure that it was facing upwards towards me, and I'm using my bone folder to curl the paper a little bit. It just makes it easier for the next step. You don't have to have a bone folder for this either. You could just use something like a Sharpie or a marker. You just want to give a little bend to that paper so that it's easier to curl. Now I'm taking all of my little square pieces and I'm just rolling the 2 points together on either side to form a shape that looks like an ice cream cone. So I'll zoom here in a little bit so you can see it better. So you can see I'm taking the points from each side and I'm just overlapping them in the center. And I'm using hot glue here because I think it sticks faster than paper crafting glue. And you can see it just makes a little ice cream cone shape. So if you get a little confused when you're trying to glue these together, instead of thinking of these pieces of paper as a square, think of them as a diamond, and you're just rolling the 2 sides into each other. And you want to do that with all 12 pieces. I'm using a 1.5 inch circle punch to punch a few circles out of this glitter cardstock. If you don't have a paper punch, just use something like a small paint bottle and trace around it just to give you some circles. You'll need 2 for each ornament that you're going to make. So I laid my circle down on my silicone mat just to make sure that none of the glue seeped out. And I'm going to start placing all of my little cones on top of the circle. And I find it's easier if I work in sections. So I laid my first 2 cones down across from each other, and then I divided those sections in half, and I created something that looks like a plus sign. And now I just need to fill in the other gaps with the rest of my cones. So once you have that plus sign in place, it makes it a lot easier to space the other cones out in between all of them. And again, I'm using hot glue here because I think it works really well for paper, especially for something like this. It just sets up a lot faster than some of the traditional paper crafting glues. Now once all of my cones are in place on top of my circle, you can see because of the points are a little bit smaller, it dips down in the center, and I do want to glue something in the center to cover those points up. So I need to fill that gap a little. I grabbed a craft stick and I just cut a few small pieces off, and I hot glued that right into the center, and then I was able to glue my second circle on top of it. And I had this small wooden star in my stash, so I added that as a final embellishment. And you can see the difference here between the 2 that I created. The one I left the pattern side up when I was curling my papers, and the other one I did the green side. And for that one, I kept it pretty much the same, except instead of a star in the middle, I put a little snowflake in the middle, and then I finished each of them off with just a little gemstone. Now to be able to hang this ornament, I'm just using a regular paper punch at the top of one of the cones to create a hole. And then I'm using some small red ribbon and I'm just slipping it through and pulling the ends through that loop and then tying a knot on the other end so that I have a way to hang these on my tree. I also made a few of these too to hang on either side of my mantle, and it looks really pretty. My pap is one of the hardest people I have to buy for Christmas, and I always like to fix him up a snack basket. So from the Dollar Tree, I grabbed one of their foil pans, and I made sure that the pan I grabbed had a plastic lid, and then I also grabbed a bunch of snacks that I knew my pap would like. I want to show you how you can create a really cute snack basket and use the window clings to decorate it. I'm using a set from the Dollar Tree, and I specifically picked these out because of this part that says good tidings of comfort and joy, because what's more comforting than a big basket of snacks? I started by laying 2 sheets of tissue paper down into the bottom of the tray. I just scrunched the corners up a little bit so that it would fit better. And then I started adding in my snacks. Now, also keep this gift in mind if you're going to a function or a Christmas party where you have to take a gift. You could make this as big or as small as you needed to. For this particular one, I picked out 7 different snacks, and then with the cost of the tray also, 8 items at the Dollar Tree now equals $10. So I know a lot of us have like work parties and such that we need a $10 gift for. So I think this would make a really good idea. Everybody loves snacks, and if you know who you're giving it to, like I know I'm going to give mine to my pap, you can pick out the things that they like the most. I was inspired to put this together because a lot of you know I work full-time in a hair salon, and we have quite a few clients that will bring in something similar to this. You know, it's usually some kind of gift basket or tray, and they just load it with snacks, and it's for all of us to share, which we always really, really appreciate. We get really excited when we see those yummy treats. So keep that in mind too if you have a dentist office or a doctor's office or a salon that you want to give the staff a fun gift. Everybody loves snacks, so everybody is going to appreciate getting something like this. Once I had my tray all filled, I put the lid back on, and I just made a small gift tag. You could use a pre-made gift tag. I just already had some supplies on hand, so I just made one out of some cardstock, and then I tied on one of these little gnome ornaments from the Dollar Tree because the window clean pack I'm using has some gnomes on it, so I thought it would work really well together. Now the fun part starts. I can start decorating the top of this tray. I wanted to add my gift tag first. I'm just using a glue dot here. This isn't a permanent glue dot. It's a removable one because I want my pap to be able to reuse this tray. So that's why the window clings are a great option for this. I'm not sticking them down with any adhesive. I'm just letting them cling to the plastic like they would a window. And whenever he's done with his little snack tray, he can just take all of the window clings and that tag off and reuse this tray for something else. And you can really get creative here, add as many window clings as you'd like. Since mine had this big good tidings of comfort and joy on it, I wanted to make sure that that was the focus of mine. If you have one wooden shape left out of a pack, I'll show you how you can take a pack of wood beads and create a simple wood bead garland. I didn't feel like waiting around for paint or stain to dry, so I'm adding some distress ink to the surface of this snowflake to give it a stained look. And because this will be on the end of a wood bead garland, I made sure that I added ink to both sides of it. I cut a fairly long piece of thinner jute cord, and I strung that through the hole that was at the top of my snowflake. Then I took the 2 ends and I added just a small amount of hot glue. I let it cool down for just a second, and then I rolled the 2 ends together in between my fingers, and this just made it a lot easier to string my beads on. I started with the green bead and I went green, red, white, and I just continued that until I had the length of garland that I wanted. I wanted to create a tassel for the other end of my wood bead garland. I grabbed my sanding block because I like the size of that for tassels, and I wrapped the same thinner jute twine around my sanding block about 25 times. Once I had it all wrapped around, then I just cut it down the center, and I gathered up my little pile of jute twine, and using the 2 ends of the string that are coming out of the end of the wood bead, I tied my jute twine onto the end of the wood beads. Once that was secured into place, then I moved down about an inch from the top of the tassel, and I tied a second piece of jute cord around there to pull everything together. As a finishing touch for my tassel, I grabbed some red and white checked ribbon that I had, and I just wrapped it around that jute twine that I had tied at the top. Then, to make both ends of my tassel look cohesive, I grabbed 2 buttons out of my stash and I glued one button at the top of my tassel to hide those ribbon ends, and then I hot glued the other one to the center of the snowflake. Sometimes when you don't know what to get somebody, the best thing you can do is just give them money. They say money always fits, right? So I'm going to take one of the Christmas trees from the Dollar Tree and I'm going to show you how you can decorate it up using money. To get started on creating my money ornaments, I'm using some pipe cleaners and I'm just cutting them in half. I also have this silver mesh ribbon on hand. I cut a piece that was about the same length as the dollar bill I'm using. Now, starting at the bottom of the dollar bill, I'm just accordion pleating the whole thing until I get to the other side. Once I have that folded up like a fan, then I'm just going to place that mesh ribbon right behind it. I just cinched it in the middle a bit, and then I'm using that pipe cleaner from the front onto the back, and then I'm just giving it a few twists to hold both of those pieces together. Then all I needed to do was fan out both sides of my dollar bill. It created something that looked like a bow tie, and because I have that mesh ribbon behind it, it added a little extra sparkle. Now, the great thing about this is you can use any denomination of money that you'd like, and if you're not in the US and you don't have this type of money, it'll work with any type of paper money. And since I didn't use any type of adhesive on the paper, it's not going to damage it at all. I'm going to show you a little bit closer here. So I'm starting again at the bottom of my dollar bill and I'm just folding it like an accordion until I get to the other side. And again, I'm just using a piece of that mesh ribbon. I liked this ribbon because it's a bit thinner and it doesn't have any wire in it, so I didn't have any trouble wrapping it around the back side. You could also use tulle here in place of the ribbon. And then once I had that pipe cleaner in the center, I gave it a few twists and I fanned everything out, and that little bit of ribbon just gave it an extra sparkle. The Christmas trees at the Dollar Tree come in green and white. I happen to have a white one on hand, so that's what I'm using. It does have little legs in the box so you can stand it upright. They're not the fullest looking Christmas trees, but when you're giving it in a gift like this situation, it's okay. I just did my best to fan the branches out as best as I could and make it into a better shape. Now, the main focus on this tree is going to be those little money ornaments, but I did want to add a pop of color to this white tree. I grabbed a container of this mini garland from the Dollar Tree. It has a thin wire running through it, so it's really easy to use, and I just wove it back and forth on my Christmas tree. I'm using the pipe cleaners from the money ornaments just to twist around the branches of the Christmas tree to decorate it the whole way down. Now, another idea I had, if you want to give lottery tickets to somebody, you could use some mini clothespins and you could pin some lottery tickets all over the front of this tree. Or if you wanted to do a complete gift set with the money too, you could attach the money to the tree and then maybe give them some of the mini ornaments from the Dollar Tree, maybe a fairy light set and one of the mini tree skirts. And after they take the money off of the tree, they could decorate it with the things you gave them and display it. Also, keep this idea in mind if you have to do a giveaway for something. I know this time of year, a lot of times there's basket parties and different things that people need donations for, and this would be a great way to do a quick donation for a giveaway for a different raffle or basket party. Little storage bins like this are a great way to add a touch of decoration to your home while also serving a purpose. If you're like me, you probably have a few cardboard boxes laying around from online shopping. And conveniently enough, this cardboard box already had the measurements on it, so I knew the finished product would be 9 by 8.5 by 4. In addition to this box, I also have this piece of fleece material. I think this might have been one of the scarves from the Dollar Tree. I'm really not sure, or if it's just a scrap from something else that I made. To get started, I just reassembled the box with some duct tape and I cut off the top flaps. Then along the bottom of the box, I ran a small bead of hot glue and I started lining that piece of material I had up along the bottom edge. I didn't want to add too much hot glue because I was afraid you would be able to see the little lumps and bumps through the bottom. So that's why I'm just adding it along the bottom edge here. And I'm really not worried about covering the bottom of the box because since it'll be sitting on something, you're not going to see that anyway. I just did that the whole way around the box until I came back to the other side. I got lucky with this piece of material because I had enough to tuck it down over all of the edges and it reached the bottom. But I still wanted to cover up that bottom just in case you would see that a little bit. So using 2 of those flaps that I had originally cut off the box, I just lined those up and used some duct tape to hold them together. Then I took a piece of coordinating material because I didn't have enough of the red and black check left. And I just laid the cardboard piece that I created on that new piece of material and I cut it out, leaving about 1 inch the whole way around. Using some hot glue, I tucked all of the edges over that piece of cardboard just so that I had an insert piece now that I could slip into the bottom of the box and you wouldn't see that raw cardboard just showing through. Starting along the back side of the box where you could see that fleece come together, I grabbed some burlap ribbon that I already had and I started hot gluing it along the top edge. I glued it down so that there was about 1 inch of the ribbon sticking up above the box, and because the hot glue does seep through the burlap, I was really careful to make sure that I didn't stick my fingers in it, even though I did a few times. And I also wanted to make sure that you couldn't see the hot glue anywhere that would be important. So I'm only adding a small dot at each of the corners of the box and also 1 small dot in the center wall of each box. I worked my way around the box till I had that burlap in place. And then I went through and in each of the corners of the box, I just took my scissors and I cut down the burlap until I was at the top of the box. This just made it easier to fold the burlap into the box. It took out a little bit of the bulk that was in the corners. So once I had all of those slits in place, then I just ran some hot glue along the seam edge of the burlap and tucked it down inside. Keep in mind, this would work well with ribbon also. I just really wanted my box to look very similar to the Kirkland, so that's why I chose to use burlap. But you could do the same thing with any kind of ribbon that you might have in your stash too. To create the leather accents for my storage box, I'm using some of this black leather ribbon that I had, and I cut a piece that was about 8 inches long. I folded it in half. I added a small dot of hot glue right at the fold, and then I added just a small amount of hot glue towards the top of the ribbon to hold it all together. I didn't run hot glue along the whole length because sometimes it shows through because this ribbon is kind of thin, which is another reason that I decided to double it up. Now that I had my little leather piece all assembled, I'm using a little hot glue on the inside. I put it on that burlap, lined my ribbon up, and then folded it over to the edge. This is why I made it 8 inches long, because I wanted to make sure that it dropped down below the edge of that burlap. As a finishing touch, I added a small button to the end of it to make it look like it was buttoned onto the box. And I did repeat that on all 4 sides. I've been seeing on Pinterest and TikTok for a couple of years now, people use candy bars and they wrap them to look like snowmen. So this isn't my original idea, but I thought it'd be really cute and I want to make a few to add to packages that I'm wrapping for Christmas. You just need a few different candy bars and some white copy paper. You don't want to use cardstock here. That would probably be just a little too thick. I'm starting with a standard 8.5 by 11 inch piece of copy paper, and I folded it in half so that it would be a little less translucent and you wouldn't see the logo of the candy bar through the paper. Now, I think that the wider, flatter candy bars work better for the snowman. That's why I'm just using the plain Hershey bars here. But I think it would be really cute to change up too if you wanted to give somebody a whole gift of different candy bars. I think it would be cute to use different ones of different sizes and shapes and put them in a little basket or box and have like a whole family of snowmen. I think that would look cute. I think the Kit Kat bars and probably also the Reese's peanut butter cups would work well for this too. I would stay away from some of the narrower candy bars like Snickers. I think it would be a little hard to make those look like a snowman. So you can see I just wrapped my candy bar basically the same way you would wrap a package, and then I could get to work on decorating my snowman. The little flaps on the candy bar wrapper itself, I did tape those down just so that I could get a flatter wrap when I was putting my copy paper on. Now for this first snowman, I'm going to give him a little set of earmuffs. So I'm just using some green pom-poms and a green pipe cleaner, and I'm just gluing it to either side of my candy bar. Then I took some red gingham ribbon and I just tied it around where a scarf would normally lay on a snowman, and I tied it into a bow. You could use fleece here or even a piece of fabric, but I had this ribbon on hand and I thought it looked good with the green earmuffs. Now, because this is just copy paper on the candy bar, I'm just going to use markers to draw on a snowman face and also draw on some buttons at the front. If you go on Pinterest, you can just search snowman faces and it'll give you a lot of different ideas on fun, cute little ways that you can draw different faces. I think these candy bar snowmen would be really great for holiday parties and get-togethers because it is just copy paper. You could even use this at each place setting. You could write the person's name at the bottom so that they would know where to sit. Or like I mentioned, I'm going to add them to some different packages that I'm wrapping. So there's enough space at the bottom that I could just write my to and from on there instead of having to add a gift tag. There's a lot of different ways you can decorate these candy bars too. I just kept mine simple by doing bows in place of the scarf. And then for a different idea for one, instead of adding a hat, I just made a really big bow for at the top, like a little girl snowman would have on her head. I thought it turned out really cute. I just took a piece of wider ribbon and I cinched it in the center with some jute cord and I glued it right to the top. Like I mentioned before, if you're not confident in drawing on some snowman faces, just go to Pinterest and search for snowman faces, and there's a lot of ideas there that you could use. I also wanted to show you that I made a few of the mini Hershey candy bars into snowmen too, and I think these would look really cute as little favors for coworkers or neighbors or anybody that you need a little sweet treat for. Dollar Tree has these really great packs of wood beads for Christmas. They come in red, green, and white, but I have a pretty big collection of wood beads of my own, so I wanted to create a few mini wood bead wreaths to hang on my tree. And this is a great craft too if you have kiddos in your life that you want to do a little craft project with, because you don't have to use a glue gun for this at all. I'm using a pipe cleaner to string all of my beads onto. I was originally going to use some jute twine, but then I was afraid that it was a little too flimsy and the wreath wouldn't hold its shape. But because the pipe cleaners have a wire running through them, I knew it would be able to keep that nice round shape. Now with the size beads that I'm using, which I would say is the standard size as far as wood bead goes, I found that 12 beads was a good amount to create a nice size circle. So you can see here, I just grabbed some and I formed a little pattern. And once I had all of my beads onto my pipe cleaner, I just took the two ends and I twisted them together. I used some wire cutters to cut the excess pipe cleaner off, and then I just tucked the little ends to the back. Now, before I got started on embellishing my little wood wreaths, I wanted to put the hanger on first, so I'm using some thinner ribbon, and I just cut a length of it and looped it around the top where that pipe cleaner was. I pulled the ends through the loop and then tied in a knot on the end so that I would have a way to hang it. You could also buy those really large packs of ornament hangers, you know, the ones that are made of metal, and you could just attach one of those to these also, but I really like the little pop of color that the ribbon gives it at the top. I chose to make bows to hot glue to the top of each of my wood bead wreaths, but if you were going to make this craft with kids, I would say buy a pack of the pre-made bows that have the twist ties on them, and then they could just twist them on themselves and you don't have to worry about them burning themselves with the hot glue. Or if you wanted to let them play around with ribbon, just let them tie it on rather than glue it on, and they could tie a bow that way. The window clings at Walmart vary in price. This pack that I have is $1.98, and I found that the ones that have a little bit of glitter on them were more expensive, but some of the ones that didn't have any glitter on them were only 98 cents. So keep an eye out there if you're looking for some window clings. I also grabbed this charger from the Dollar Tree. I love how glittery it is, and this was just in the regular part of Dollar Tree, so it was just $1.25. And instead of hanging this charger, I bought one of the art stands that they have at the Dollar Tree to display it that way. I also dug around in my stash and I grabbed a few different types of ribbons so that I can really give this a good embellishment. Now to get started, I wanted to lay out my window clings first, and because this charger has glitter on it, the window clings don't stick on their own. I think if you had one of the chargers that just had a smooth finish, you probably could just lay the window clings down and they would stay in place for you. But because, like I said, this has some texture on it, they weren't staying in place. Once I had all of my window clings on in a pattern that I liked, I just used my phone to take a picture so that I could remember where I needed to place all of them. I want to use some Mod Podge to adhere these window clings down, and it doesn't matter what finish you use, if it's glossy or matte, because you're not going to see it anyway. Now, one thing you have to be careful about with these window clings is because the background on these tends to be pretty transparent. If you put too much of the Mod Podge all over the back side of it, it takes a really long time for that Mod Podge to dry, and if it's too thick, it never really gets clear enough. I tried doing this back in the fall when I was doing some other window cling crafts, and I had applied Mod Podge all over the back side of the window cling, and it never really dried right. I didn't care for how it turned out, so that's why I never showed it in a video. So I thought to remedy that, to make this a little bit nicer looking, on the parts of the window cling that are opaque, so in that instance it was everywhere that there was a letter, I just applied a little bit of Mod Podge. So that way you weren't seeing these big white patches through the background on it. So I would say just be careful when you're doing that. Make sure you're doing a pretty thin coat. Don't clump up the Mod Podge anywhere. And you can see on these trees, I'm trying to just stick where the trees are, not so much where the background is. Now, the one good thing about this craft in particular, because it is snow themed, if a little bit of that white shows, I think it just blends in. It kind of makes it look like snow, so it worked out okay for this. And I also think the texture of the charger, the glitter on there, helped with this too. If there was a little bit of Mod Podge showing, it kind of blended into the glitter. So like I said, just be mindful when you're putting down your window clings that you're just adding the Mod Podge on the solid parts so that you don't see it and you don't have to wait forever for it to dry. I let this dry for a good while and then I checked on it and I felt like everything was adhered down pretty well. So I didn't go back over and seal the whole thing with Mod Podge, but that's something you could do if you feel like you didn't quite get them stuck down enough, if you're afraid they're going to start lifting. Once it's dried enough that everything's going to stay in place, you could give the whole thing a coat with Mod Podge just to seal those edges down. If you've been hanging out with me for a while, you probably already know that one of my favorite types of bows to make is the scrappy bow. And I wanted to make one on this charger also, but I wanted to give you a different example of it. So normally whenever I create a scrappy bow, I gather up a bunch of ribbons in a few different colors that go along with the project that I'm doing. But this time I actually gathered up ribbons and trims only in white because I wanted to show you how you could do it all in one color. And if you have a lot of different textures of ribbons and trims, it gives it a really cool look. So if you've never made a scrappy bow before, you probably saw that I laid my ribbon out on my charger where I wanted it to be so that I could get an idea of how wide I wanted my bow. And then I just started going through with each of the ribbons and trims that I had on hand, and I cut 2 pieces of each of the ribbons. And you'll see here as I keep cutting all of my ribbons that they vary in the width as well as the texture. So that's what makes a really cool scrappy bows. If you have ribbons that are wide and some that are narrow, and then you have some that have a different texture. You can see I'm using lace too, not just ribbons. So anything you have on hand, this is a great way to use up some of the things that you've been holding on to, because if you're like me, you probably have a big stash of ribbons and trims that you need to work your way through, and this is a great way to use a lot of those up. Once I had all of my ribbons cut down to size, on the ribbons that were more narrow, I just cut each end at an angle, and then on some of the wider ribbons, I wanted to dovetail those, so I just folded it in half and I cut it on an angle from the outside to the inside. Now this isn't necessary, but I do like how the points look on the scrappy bows whenever you take the time to do this, but on some of the ribbons it just didn't make any sense to do that. So like on the lace pieces, it didn't really make sense to cut those at an angle, and I had a bigger piece of trim with like flowers on it and it didn't make sense to do anything. So just use your judgment as to what you need to do for each of your ribbons. After my ribbons were all prepped, then I could start putting my bow together. It's a little hard to see, but I laid a piece of that sheer ribbon down, and then I'm starting with the narrower pieces of ribbon and I'm just laying them out in an X pattern. So now you can see that I'm just starting with the narrow trims and ribbons and I'm working my way to the wider pieces, and I just keep laying them in an X on top of that ribbon that I had laid down vertically. Now, one tip I have is the piece that you're going to use to tie all of this together should be a little bit smaller and it should be pretty flexible. So I wouldn't recommend using a wired ribbon here. The sheer ribbon that I have is pretty flimsy and there's no wire in it, so it was easy to use. If none of your ribbons are like that, just use a piece of jute twine, or you probably could even use a pipe cleaner here. So after my ribbons were all laid down, then I just gathered them up in the center and I used that ribbon to tie it all together. The other thing I love about these scrappy bows is you don't really have to mess with them. You know, when you're doing like the loopy bows, you really have to start playing around, pulling those loops apart and everything, and it seems like it's a never-ending job. But with these scrappy bows, there's not much to do as far as fluffing the bow out goes, so it's a lot less stress and headache for me. The only thing that I do is make sure that I pull all the tails apart, and then if there's any pieces that seem just a bit too long, I go through and give those a little trim. Now again, because this charger has a glitter finish to it, there's a lot of texture there. So I felt confident that the hot glue would work in this situation. But I know on some of the other chargers from the Dollar Tree that have a smoother finish, you might want to add a little E6000 when you're gluing down your bow. As a last touch for my charger, I'm just using some of this vase filler. It's just little styrofoam balls that have white or silver glitter on them. I added some to the center of my bow, and then I added a few around the plate also, just to make it look like little snowballs. A quick and easy way to add a touch of Christmas to your kitchen is by creating some refrigerator magnets. I'm using some mini gingerbread men from the Dollar Tree, and I'm also going to be using some clothespins. You can find disc magnets at the Dollar Tree also, but I had these smaller ones from Amazon already in my stash. To get started, I needed to paint all of my little gingerbread men first. I had a hard time finding a good gingerbread color for these. I ended up mixing a few different browns together out of the paints that I had. If you have a suggestion of a paint color that you can find either at Walmart or Michael's, those are the two closest stores to me, let me know if you have a favorite gingerbread color you like to use. While my gingerbread men were drying, I got to work turning these clothespins into magnets. I had some red and white check ribbon in my stash, and this ribbon is 3/8 of an inch wide, which was the perfect size to fit across the top of a clothespin. Now, I'm always afraid to use hot glue when I'm trying to glue down ribbon because I think you can usually see the hot glue through the ribbon. Usually they're not thick enough to really hide that hot glue. So instead of hot glue, I'm using double-sided tape. This is pretty sticky tape. I use it a lot when I'm doing paper crafts. I'll make sure that I have it linked down below. And this tape is also 3/8 of an inch wide, so it fits perfectly across the top of the clothespins too. So once I had all of my tape in place, then I just needed to line my ribbon up and adhere that down and cutting off the excess. So now I have a really cute red and white checked clothespin. I wanted to add a few little details to my gingerbread men to make it look like icing. None of the white paint pens that I had a fine enough tip on them for how small these gingerbread men were, but I actually did have a white gel pen in my stash and it showed up just as well on the gingerbread as the paint markers would have. So if you have a white gel pen, just know you can use that on a painted surface also. These little disc magnets that I have don't always stay on very well with just hot glue. So I decided to do something a little bit different since I had some of that red and white check ribbon still left. I added some hot glue right over the bar where the spring joins the two sides of the clothespin together, and that's where I placed my magnet. Then I ran more hot glue from the top to the bottom of the clothespin over top of the magnet, and then I added a piece of that ribbon again. So this way the magnet is being held onto the clothespin by the hot glue, and then the ribbon is covering the whole thing up just to make sure that it stays in place. And then to finish off my magnets, I just needed to hot glue my little gingerbread man right to the front of my clothespin. Maybe you have a kiddo in your life that needs some extra cash and they like candy too. This is a great way to give them both. You'll need some sort of container for this. I'm just using a soup can that I washed out and dried really well. I grabbed this little penguin ornament from the Dollar Tree. You could also use a little stuffed animal that would fit in the can if you needed to. And then I'm going to use some candy canes and some different chocolates. If you're using a container other than a soup can, you can probably skip this step. But because this soup can had one of the pop tops on it, that inner part of the top was really sharp. You can see the band-aid on my hand there. That's from when I was washing it and I cut myself. So in order to make this a little more safe to give to somebody, I took some of this silver duct tape from the Dollar Tree. I ran it along the top edge and I'm just cutting tabs into it. This will make it easier. Now I can fold all of these little tabs towards the inside of the can. And because this is duct tape, it's nice and thick, and it added a layer of protection against that really sharp edge. You can see here, once I had all those tabs pushed down, I was able to run my finger along it and it was no longer sharp. I'm using some glitter cardstock to cover up the rest of the can. I just laid the can down right below the top lip and I made a pencil mark at the bottom of the can, and then I used my paper trimmer to cut the strip that I needed. If you don't have glitter cardstock, you could use regular paper here, or you could even use wrapping paper, just something to cover up the can. Once I had it wrapped the whole way around the can, I made another mark with my pencil and I cut the excess off so that it would fit around the can. Next, I'm just using some hot glue and I ran a pretty generous amount along the body of the can. Just be careful when you're doing this because the metal will heat up really, really fast and it gets warm quicker than what you realized. Then, because this cardstock is pretty thick, I just added a few beads of hot glue here and there as I wrapped it around. And once I got to the edge, I just used more hot glue to connect it to where I started. Before I started putting everything together, I needed to roll up some of the money that I wanted to add. I'm using this invisible tape that I got at the Dollar General. Any kind of tape that has that frosty look to it tends to not be as sticky as the clear tape, so that's what you want to keep in mind here. If you feel like the tape you're using is a bit too sticky, just take a piece and rub it on a t-shirt or a piece of cloth just to get some of the stickiness off of it, because you don't want to damage this money in any way. So I'm just taking my money and I'm rolling it up into a smallish size tube. I tried to keep it about the same width as the candy canes, and then I used a piece of that clear tape just to hold the two ends together. The candy canes and the money are going to go the whole way around the outside of the can. Now obviously I don't want to use hot glue on the money, so what I did was I used some hot glue to glue the candy cane to the outside of the can. Then I just laid down one of my rolled up dollar bills to act as a spacer, so I knew how much space to leave between each of the candy canes. So you can see here, once I laid that dollar bill in, then I added more hot glue and I placed the candy cane on top of it. I just did that the whole way around until I got back to the beginning. As I got towards the end of the can, I did have to adjust the spacing a little bit, but that was okay. Every time I glued one of the candy canes down, I just made sure that the hook was facing towards the outside. After all of my candy canes were glued in place, then I just took a rubber band and I slipped it around the whole thing. This created just enough tension around the can that I was able to slip my rolled up dollar bills in between each of the candy canes. This way they can be slid in and out and there's no damage to the money itself. Also keep in mind, you don't have to add the money at all. If you wanted to just give a gift of candy, you could just glue candy canes the whole way around this can. There's enough space in between each of those candy canes that you could just glue another one and just have the whole can wrapped in candy canes. I think that would be really cute, especially if you got some of the different flavors of candy cane. It would really change up the color and pattern. To cover up where that rubber band was sitting and to give a little more stability to the candy canes and the money, I'm just using some peppermint striped ribbon here and I hot glued that around the can. I made sure that I only added the hot glue to the candy cane so that the money wouldn't get damaged. I also created a small bow out of the same ribbon. I just took one loop of the ribbon and I cinched it in the center using another small piece of the same ribbon. It kind of gave it that bow tie look. And then I just used some hot glue to attach that to the side of the can. My last step to finish this gift off was just to fill the can with some different chocolates that I had got from the Dollar Tree, and then I was able to set my penguin right down on top. I thought this little drum from the Kirkland's website was really cute, but I wanted to create it in a way that you could also do this with kids. The poster board at the Dollar Tree comes in sheets that are 22 by 28 inches. I cut mine down to 8 by 28 inches, but keep in mind, if you wanted to make this smaller, you could too. I just wanted to make mine bigger so that you could see it a little bit better. Now on the poster board, it's hard to see on camera, but there is a shiny side and a matte side, and I always think it's easier to color or paint on the matte side, so I made sure that I had that facing me. Now to get started, I thought it would be easier to get the triangles painted first. So I took my ruler and I laid it at the bottom and I marked a little dot every 3 inches. I did that the whole way across until I reached the end. On the opposite side, I made my first mark at 1.5 inches to start. I had to show you here on the ruler because I couldn't quite get it in camera. But then from that 1.5 inch mark, I just laid my ruler down and I just repeated the same thing. I made a mark every 3 inches until I got to the end of the piece of poster board. So again, on that opposite side, your first mark is going to be at 1.5 inches, and then from that mark, you'll measure out every 3 inches until you reach the end. Now that all of my marks are in place, I can just go through with my ruler and a pencil and start connecting the dots. So I started in the corner and I laid my ruler down till I reached that mark on the top and I drew a line. Then from that same mark at the top, I laid my ruler down and lined it up with the bottom mark and drew another line. And you can already see the triangles are starting to take shape. So every dot that I have, I just connected one of the bottom dots to the top dot, and then I went the whole way across until all of my triangles are in place. Now, depending on the age of the kid that you might want to do this project with, this is pretty simple. I think older kids could get the measurements down and be able to create their own lines. But if you're working with smaller kids, you may want to draw out their triangles for them so that they can just have fun coloring them in. I drew my pencil lines on pretty dark so that you could see them on camera. So before I started painting, I just took an eraser lightly over it just to lighten them up a bit so they wouldn't show through the paint. Now I'm using paint here because I think it shows up better on camera, but if you wanted to, you could use colored pencils. For little kids, you could use crayons, markers, anything like that. And you could do it in any colors you want. You could even let kids have a great time. I'm sure they would love to do some patterns and shapes and put their name on it and, you know, all that fun stuff that kids do. But I'm just trying to keep mine as close to the Kirkland's one. So I went through and I colored all of my triangles red and green, the traditional Christmas colors. And in order to keep it to look more like the Kirkland's one, everywhere that I painted the green was all on the same side. So you can kind of tell here that the green paint is in all of the triangles that are facing the same direction. And then I went through with the red paint and I painted the opposite triangles the red. Now, if you're doing this with kids, you probably would want to skip this step because it's really not necessary, but I wanted to make sure that the band at the top and bottom of my drum were the same width the whole way across. So I just used my ruler and I marked about an inch down from the top. The Dollar Tree sells all sorts of different colors of duct tape, and I found this really cool silver holographic tape that I thought would look good on this drum. Using those pencil marks, I just lined my duct tape on those marks and I ran down the whole length of my drum, and then I was able to fold the duct tape over to the back side, and it really gave the edges a nice finished look. I also repeated that along the opposite side so that my drum had a band on the top and bottom. I really wanted to create something that looked like the rivets on the Kirkland's drum, and this is definitely not necessary, especially if you're doing this with a kid. But I cut a small piece of cardstock in about the same shape that the Kirkland's drum had on its rivets. And then I took that same duct tape and I just laid a piece of it down on a piece of white cardstock and cut around it. Then I used that little shape that I had already cut out of cardstock and I traced it on to the piece of cardstock that had the tape on it. I'm using the opposite side here so I can see my pencil marks. And then I just cut all of these fake rivets out with my scissors. Now, like I said, if you're doing this with kids, this would probably be kind of a pain in the butt. I'm sure they would lose interest at this point. So if you wanted to do something a little bit different, but still get that rivet look on the drum, I would say use some buttons. I think that would look really cute everywhere that the points connect. You could have them glue down a little button or even have them hand draw in something. They could draw in a little rivet, they could draw in a button, whatever they feel like doing. I think that would look really cute. Or you could skip this step altogether because I think the drum looks really good as is. Now here's where I had to improvise a little bit. Originally, I thought I was going to roll this drum around a larger can that I had, but I couldn't find that can, or maybe I got rid of it. So instead, I grabbed one of these small plastic plates that I had and I just rolled the drum around it so that it fit around that plate, and that's what I'm going to use as my base. But it would be much easier to use a can or some other kind of canister that you might have on hand, like a coffee can or something like that. So what I did was I wrapped the drum around it so that it would fit around that plate, and then I just made a mark to where I needed to cut off the excess. So looking back on it, I probably could have measured this first before I started painting it, but it worked out in the end. I didn't have to cut too much of the excess off. Once I had the right size for my drum, then I just used some hot glue to glue the two ends together. I also ran a piece of that duct tape on the inside just to secure that seam a little bit more. Next, I just used a little bit of hot glue and I hot glued my fake rivets on everywhere that there was a point where the two colors came together. And I did that all along the bottom and the top of my drum. As a final touch for my drum, I had some sticky back gems in my stash, so I just peeled a few of those off and placed those on the tips of each of the rivets. You could use buttons here, or you could even skip this step, but I just think it added a really cute embellishment. At this point, if you had a can or a canister that you were using for inside of your drum, I would just fill it with some floral foam and then add whatever picks you like. Now, because I didn't have a can or a canister, I kind of had to build up my floral foam on top of that plate, but I did use a wooden skewer down the center to help keep it stable. I may switch this out later, but for now, it works just fine. An easy way to let kids decorate this would be to get one of the mini Christmas trees from Dollar Tree, stick that down in the middle of the floral foam, and let them add whatever ornaments or flowers they want to it. I really like that the Dollar Tree carries these small bundles of yarn, and I wanted to show you a way to create a snowman using just a few items. In addition to the yarn, I'm also going to be using some of the foam board and some felt. To get started, I wanted to create a pattern for my snowman, so I just picked out 2 rolls of ribbon. One is a little bit smaller than the other to create my snowman shape. The great thing about this is you can make these snowmen as big or as small as you want. And you can see when I traced my ribbon rolls on my piece of cardstock here, I overlapped the smaller one just a bit on top of the bigger one to give me that nice snowman shape. I figured it would be easier to create a pattern out of cardstock rather than trying to put the ribbon rolls on the foam board in the exact same spot every time. It just made more sense for me to create a pattern that I could use on my foam board. So once I had my pattern all cut out of the cardstock, then I was able to move to my foam board and just trace around it using a pencil. Now I'm going to create a garland out of my snowmen, but you'll see once I have my snowmen finished, you can use these in a bunch of different ways. Since I'm creating a garland, I'm tracing out 4 snowmen on my foam board, and I'm just using a utility knife to cut them out. I should also mention that I picked the foam board to use rather than cardboard because it was white, so since I'm using white yarn, it would blend in together. You could use cardboard here if that's all you have on hand. I would probably just give it a quick coat of white paint so that you don't see the gaps in the yarn. Now don't worry if you don't cut it out perfect. Sometimes the foam board is a little tricky to use. I just used a sanding block and some scissors to clean up any of the edges. If you have kiddos in your life that you like to craft with, this would probably be a good step for them to do. I just started by taking my yarn and using a piece of tape. I taped it on the back side of my snowman, and then I just got to work wrapping the yarn in all different directions all over my snowman. This is why I wanted to create a pattern out of the snowman to start. I felt like if I would have wrapped each circle separately, it would have been a little bit harder to connect the two. So by creating a pattern where the circles were already connected, it made it a lot easier to wrap this whole piece of foam board with the yarn. And you can see that's why I chose to use the foam board, because even though there are some gaps in the yarn where it didn't quite cover the whole way, it blended in because it was the same color. Also keep in mind, if you didn't cut your snowman out perfectly, it's okay. As you're wrapping it around, the foam board will bend just a little, and you can kind of even out any spots where you might have a little extra lump or bump. But I kept mine in because I think it just added to the uniqueness of each snowman. Once I had it all wrapped, then I just used a little hot glue on the backside to hold the end in place. There are a lot of different ways that you could create faces for your snowman. I'm keeping it simple and just using some cardstock. I'm just taking a standard size hole punch here, and I'm cutting a bunch of circles out of some black cardstock, and this will serve as my eyes and also the buttons on the front of my snowman. I'm also using some orange cardstock to cut out some long triangle shapes, and those are going to be the nose for my snowman. If you didn't want to use cardstock, you could use pom-poms, you could use buttons, anything that you have on hand will do. And because these pieces are so small and I created my snowman on the smaller side, I am only doing a nose and eyes on mine, but if you had more space on yours, you could add a mouth too. Because these circles are a little on the small side, I'm using tweezers, and it made it a little bit easier to glue everything down. And I'm just using hot glue here. If you had kids that you were doing this with, I think you could use like a school glue, like the Elmer's glue. You would just have to give it a little bit of extra time to dry. Now you can get creative with what type of accessories you want your snowman to have. I'm using some red felt. I cut a strip out that was about a 1/2 inch wide, and this is going to be the scarf for my snowman. I added a little hot glue to the back side to hold it in place. Now this felt is from the Dollar Tree, and it is on the thinner side, so I was really careful where I put my hot glue because I knew it would soak through and you would be able to see it. I added a little more hot glue on the front just to hold that scarf in place, and then I used my scissors to cut some little fringes on the end. And then as a final embellishment, I did take a button and I added it right to that scarf to cover up where that hot glue was. I mentioned that I'm going to use my snowmen to create a garland. So I have some wooden beads in 2 different sizes, and I really like these ones because they have a little distressing on them, which I really like. I'm just going to use some regular jute cord. This is a little bit thicker than the stuff you can get at the Dollar Tree. I get this kind at Walmart. I added a little hot glue to the end to make it easier to string my beads on, and I'm only adding 3 beads in between each of the snowmen. And since I had it in 2 different sizes, I put a big one in the middle and a small one on each side. So once I had my first set of beads on my jute twine, then I just used some hot glue and I glued my snowman right to the jute. I find this is a little bit easier when I'm creating garlands if I can glue the bigger pieces right to the twine or rope or whatever I'm using. In the past, when I've tried to tie on pieces, they tend to flop around or spin and they're never quite facing the right direction. So for me, it's just a little bit easier if I glue them right to the cord that I'm using. And you can see in between each of my snowman, I just added 3 more beads as an extra element for my garland. Now the table that I'm going to drape this on isn't very wide, so I'm only using 4 snowmen, but you can use as many as you'd like. And another idea I had for these little snowman is if you wanted to, you could add a ribbon hanger to the back and you could use these as Christmas ornaments, or you could also add a ribbon hanger and you could tie these onto packages too. If you're like me, you probably like to decorate your tree with ornaments of different sizes. I want to show you how you can take some of these tubes of ornaments from the Dollar Tree and make them bigger so they can fill in some of those bigger gaps you might have on your tree. I'm starting with one of the red packs of ornaments, and I also grabbed a few of the smaller packs of ornaments that they have. These ones are a little bit fancier. They have some designs on them, and they usually only come 2 to a pack. I also have some ribbon in my stash I'm going to use and a few pipe cleaners. I want to start by cutting my ribbons for these bigger ornaments. I have 2 size ribbons here. One's much wider than the other one. I'm starting with the smaller ribbon and I cut 2 pieces at 8 inches. Then with my wider ribbon, I made that a little bit longer and I cut 2 pieces at 10 inches. I like to finish my ribbons in a dovetail shape, so I just folded them in half and I cut from the outside towards the inside on an angle, and that's what gave me that dovetail shape. I did that with both sets of the ribbons that I had already cut. You don't have to do a dovetail, you could just cut them on an angle if that would be easier for you. Now this is where it gets really easy to assemble these bigger ornaments. I just gathered up 3 ornaments. You can see I have a red one and 2 of the silver ones, and I strung them onto my pipe cleaner and I gave it a twist and it gave me this cute little ornament bundle. Then I took my 2 sets of ribbons and I'm laying them down with the smaller ribbon first and then the wider ribbon right behind it, and you can see here that I laid them out into an X shape over top of that pipe cleaner. And since the pipe cleaner has plenty of room left on it, I was able to just use that to cinch those ribbons together. And now I have this really cute bundle of ornaments with ribbons behind it, and you can already see how much bigger it is than the original ornament. I also had this silver poinsettia in my stash, so I finished all of this off with that just to give it a little bit of an extra embellishment. There's also plenty of pipe cleaner left on the back that's what I'll use to attach it to my tree. I'll just wrap it around one of the branches and it'll be nice and secure. I wanted to create a quick and easy centerpiece, so from the Dollar Tree Plus section, I grabbed one of these white ceramic vases for $5. You probably could find something similar at a thrift store. I'm also going to be using one of the packs of window clings from Walmart, and this one doesn't have any glitter on it, so this one was only 98 cents. In addition to the window clings, I'm also going to be using 2 of the mini Christmas trees from the Dollar Tree. I'll be sticking both of these Christmas trees into the vase, so I didn't need the little tree stands that came with them, and that cap where the tree stand goes into, I also didn't need on the tree, so I was able to just throw those away. Let me know in the comments if you have any good ideas of ways to use those pieces from the tree stands, because I feel like I use these trees a lot, but I never use the pieces that come with them. I'm always putting the trees into something else. To get started on fluffing out my trees, I was pulling all of the branches out to the side and towards me, and I was leaving one side flat because I'm going to put both of these trees together to make them more full. Because you can see they're a little sparse. I mean, they are from the Dollar Tree. They're only $1.25. So once I had both of my trees fluffed out and I had a flat side on each one, I was able to just put the 2 flat sides together, and I used a few zip ties along that center rod to attach them together. If you have green zip ties, these would probably blend right in. Mine didn't stick out too bad. I didn't feel like I needed to cover them up, but if you can see yours, like if you get one of the trees that's really sparse and you can see those zip ties through it, just use some of those garland ties that you can get and wrap one of those around it and it should blend right in, but I was able to hide mine with some of the branches. You can decorate your tree however you'd like. I'm keeping mine simple because I have so much of this vase filler. I thought I would just hot glue these little balls everywhere. They look like ornaments. They look like snowballs. I think they fit the bill. Now, it would probably be a lot easier to decorate this tree once it's already in the vase, but it was hard for me to get both pieces together in the camera, so that you could see it all together. So for filming purposes, I'm decorating my tree ahead of time. But like I said, if you're not hot gluing ornaments on like I am, it would probably be easier to decorate after you already have it in the vase. Now to decorate the vase, this is really simple. Because of the shiny finish on this vase, I was able to add the window clings just like you would on a window, and they stick themselves. Now I chose not to use any kind of Mod Podge or adhesive to stick mine down because I want to be able to change this out. So if you know you're only going to use this for Christmas, go ahead and put some Mod Podge on the back of yours and give it a permanent finish. And then I would probably do another coat of the Mod Podge over top of everything to seal it in. But like I said, I want to be able to take these decals off after Christmas so that I can use this vase for something else. This worked out really good with this particular pack of window clings that I had. There were a lot of taller pieces that I was able to place around the vase, and they fit on pretty well. There was just one that was a little too big, so I had to trim just a little bit off the top. And then once I had all of those bigger main pieces in, I was able to go in with some of the smaller pieces that were in this pack to fill in the gaps. So that's another tip I have when you're picking out window clings for crafts. Look for ones that have a lot of different size pieces on them. So you can see I had all of these bigger pieces that are really cute. They're little kids dressed up in Christmas costumes. And then there were some little pieces of ornaments and presents and snowflakes that I could use to fill in the gaps. I also think this vase would work really well in a kitchen as a utensil holder. If you're looking to add a little bit of Christmas decor to your kitchen, that might be a fun idea too. Since I am turning this into a centerpiece, I needed to add some floral foam to the center of my vase, so I started with one big solid chunk that I hot glued down to the bottom, and then I filled in both sides with smaller pieces just so that it was nice and sturdy and it wouldn't wiggle around. And this is where I had trouble filming. I couldn't really fit everything into the camera, but you can see I just stuck my 2 Christmas trees right into that floral foam. I thought this pack of red, green, and white wood beads from the Dollar Tree was a really great deal. You get 60 beads in the pack for $1.25. And over in the Crafter Square section, I grabbed a pack of these chunky wooden stars. If you've been hanging out and crafting with me for a while, you've probably noticed on a lot of my Kirkland's dupes videos that I make sets of napkin rings because I think it's ridiculous the amount of money that retailers like Kirkland's charge for napkin rings, and they're so easy to make. So when I saw those wood beads at the Dollar Tree, I knew I could make a really cute set of beaded napkin rings. Now to my chunky stars, I'm just adding a coat of the Rub and Buff in antique gold. I always think it's easier to apply this with just my fingers, but it does get a little bit messy, so I always like to wear gloves when I do this. For the base of my napkin ring, I'm just using some jute twine to string my beads onto. I always like to add a dot of hot glue to the end of my jute, and then once it cools down after a few seconds, I just roll it in between my fingers, and it just makes it a lot easier to string my beads on. Now I'm using all 3 colors for my napkin rings, so I did the same pattern over. It was red, green, and then white. And I ended up stringing 9 beads on total, and I found that that was the perfect size for going around a napkin. Now it's up to you if you want to use all 3 colors or just 1 or 2 colors. You can make this however you like. Before I added my stars to my napkin rings, I decided to give them one final touch. I have this really big sheet of sticky back gems in my paper crafting stash, and I thought it would be really cute to add a gem to the center of each of my stars. Now I only made 4 napkin rings here, but with the amount of beads that are in the pack, you could easily get 6 napkin rings out of one pack of the wood beads, and then the stars did come in an 8-pack, so you could definitely make a set of 6 napkin rings for just $2.50. If you're new to paper crafting or card making and you don't know where to start, use these wooden ornaments to make a really quick and easy card front. There are a lot of different ways that you can add some color to these wooden ornaments. I know paint is usually the most obvious way, but I also wanted to show you that you can use markers too. Here I'm just using a regular Sharpie marker. The point on this marker was a little fine, so it did take a little bit longer to fill in the surface, but once I had it all colored in, it was nice and vibrant. Another alternative to giving some color to these wooden ornaments is to use some ink. So I have a pretty big collection of these distress ink pads from Tim Holtz. I picked out 2 different colors, one red, one green, and I just used an ink blending tool, which is basically just a sponge, and I rubbed it all over the surface of my ornaments. Of course, since these ornaments are wood, you can always stain them too. I like to use the Antique Wax by Waverly, and my favorite way to apply it is by using a baby wipe or a wet wipe. If you want a little bit of a darker color, just apply it straight on with a paintbrush. Since the wooden shape that I'm using has some cutouts to it, I wanted to add a little bling that would show up behind it. I had some gold glitter cardstock in my paper crafting stash, so I'm using that little ornament and I'm just tracing the body out on the cardstock and cutting it out so that I could hot glue it onto the backside and you would see the glitter through it. I wanted to layer a few pieces of scrapbook paper on the fronts of my cards. Now, the pack of cards that I got from the Dollar Tree are A2 size, and that means that the front of the card measures 5.5 inches by 4.25 inches. So for my scrapbook paper, I cut 4 pieces down to 5.25 inch by 4 inches, and then I cut 4 more pieces out at 5 inches by 3.75 inches. Now, don't worry about remembering all of those measurements. I'll make sure that I have them typed out in the description box below. After all of my scrapbook paper was cut out, it was pretty easy to get all of my cards assembled. I took the smaller of the matte pieces, the ones that measure 5 by 3.75, and I just glued them on top of the larger matte piece, which was 5.25 by 4 inches. I'm using the art glitter glue here because that's my favorite glue when I'm doing any kind of paper crafts, but for making cards like this, when you're just stacking scrapbook paper on top of each other, you could use just a regular school glue stick as well. Before adding my ornaments to the fronts of my cards, I needed to add that glitter cardstock to the back side of the ornaments, and I think glitter cardstock is a little tricky to adhere to other things, so I always like to use hot glue when I'm doing this. So I just added a little bit of hot glue to the back side of the ornament and then push the glitter cardstock into it. You could use some kind of white paper crafting glue here. I have used the art glitter glue before, but I think in this case the hot glue just holds a little bit better. I did forget to show it, but after I layered those 2 pieces of scrapbook paper together, I did add them to the front of the card. And because of the measurements that I did on these, it left an 1/8 of an inch border around the whole thing. Then I used some hot glue to attach my ornament to the front of the card. And as a final embellishment, I just created some simple shoestring style bows out of jute, and I hot glued those to the top of the ornaments. One thing to keep in mind when you create a handmade card like this that has a lot of dimension to the front, it probably is going to cost extra if you decide to send these through the mail, because they are a little bit thicker and they weigh a little bit more. You'll probably have to add postage, and a lot of times I know when I go to the post office, if I have an envelope that they can feel the bulkiness through, they'll charge more because it has to be hand sorted rather than machine sorted. So I don't plan on actually sending these out through the mail. I'll just give them out in person. So I thought it would be fun to decorate the envelopes a little bit too. I had some scrap pieces of cardstock left over from when I was cutting out my matte pieces. So I took those strips and I just added them along the bottom side of the envelope. And then I have a snowflake punch. So I punched out a snowflake out of that gold glitter cardstock since I still had a lot of that left over. And I just glued that into the left-hand corner of my envelope. If you want to add an extra little light to a bookshelf or a mantle, I'm going to show you how you can use some of these wooden shapes to decorate up one of the LED pillar candles you can get at the Dollar Tree. I'm starting out by giving each of my little Christmas tree shapes one coat of green paint. Now, I did pre-measure these before I started painting, and 4 of them fit around my pillar candle. So whatever shape you decide to use, just do a dry run and see how many shapes you're actually going to be able to fit around your candle. In order to hide the hole that's at the top of these Christmas trees and to give them a little more dimension, I'm using some smaller wooden stars from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just painting them with an acrylic metallic gold paint. Now, acrylic paint is a little bit thinner, so after I painted these stars, I realized that they were still a little too translucent for me, so I did end up giving them 2 coats. After my paint had a chance to dry, I just went through with a little bit of hot glue, and I hot glued those gold stars right to the tops of my Christmas trees. Before adding my Christmas trees to my candle, I grabbed some black and white check ribbon that I had in my stash. I love this ribbon because it has a fleece feel to it. It's nice and fuzzy, and I just used some hot glue to attach that as a band around my candle. Once I had it wrapped the whole way around, I wasn't worried about hiding that edge because that's what the Christmas trees are for. So after I had the other end of my ribbon glued down, then I just started working my way around the candle and hot gluing my Christmas trees on top of the ribbon. And keep this project in mind too, in case you have a pack of these ornaments and let's say you just have one or two left out of the pack. Maybe you made something else with the pack and you don't know what to do with the one ornament that's left in the pack. Just wrap some ribbon around one of these pillar candles and just glue that one ornament on top of the ribbon. I think it would look cute with just one, but like I said, I have a pretty big stash of these wooden ornaments that I'm really trying to work my way through. So I was happy to be able to use up 4 of these on one candle. And speaking of trying to use up all of these wooden pieces that I have, I grabbed 4 snowflakes out of my stash and I just used some hot glue to stack them on top of each other. I made sure that I lined them up with the holes all facing in the same direction so that way they would line up better. Once I had all 4 of them glued and stacked on top of each other, then I just used a few little red wooden beads that I had and I glued those to the underside, and this made for a really quick candle stand. I love using snowmen when I'm decorating for Christmas and winter, so I wanted to create a few for on my tree. I have these wood slices that I ordered from Amazon. They're by the company Arteza. I know sometimes you can find the wood slices in the Dollar Tree, but I think if you know you're going to use a lot of them, it makes more sense to buy a bigger pack like that. I'll also be using a few things for embellishments, and for the hats on my snowman, I'm going to use this roll of red felt that I found in the Crafter's Square section at the Dollar Tree. Now, as much as I like the wood grain on these slices, I do want my snowmen to look a little more traditional, so I'm using some white paint and I'm just covering the surface. I'm not worried about getting the whole way out to the edges because I do like having a little bit of that wood show, and I also did not want to get paint on any of the bark that's on the side of my slices. After my paint had a chance to dry, I went to Pinterest and I just searched for snowman faces, and I found a lot of great ideas on different styles of faces that I could put on my snowmen. Snowman faces are pretty easy to make. Basically, it's just a couple of circles and a carrot nose, but I did want mine to have a little more expression, so that's why I turned to Pinterest for a little bit of help with that. If you have a cutting machine, you could also cut out decals that you could place over your wood slices, but I wanted to try my hand at creating my own. I'm just using a Sharpie here to fill in all of the black parts, and I thought I was going to be able to use this orange Sharpie to create my carrot noses, but it was a little dried out, so I had enough ink left in the Sharpie marker that I could create the outline for the noses, and then I just went through with some orange paint and I filled all of the noses in like that. I cut a piece of that felt that was wide enough that I could wrap it around the wood slice and long enough to create a hat. And I forgot to mention, but when I was putting the faces on my wood slices, I made sure that I moved them down a little bit farther. I didn't put them right in the center because I wanted to have some space for my hat. So you can see here, I just added a little bit of hot glue on the front and tucked that piece of felt down on top of that glue, wrapped it around the back, and held it in place with a little bit more hot glue. Then I took a piece of jute twine and I gathered the felt up about 1.5 inches above the face of my snowman, and I tied it there, and that's what cinched my hat together. Now for this snowman, I'm just using a piece of that same microfiber cloth that I used earlier, and I'm running around the base of the hat to look like some faux fur. You can decorate these however you want. You could add some holly and berries, you could add some ribbon. Anything you have laying around will create a really cute hat. After my band was in place, then I just cut off a little excess felt, and I wanted to make this look like a tassel cap. So I'm using my scissors and I'm just cutting all of the rest of that felt above where I tied that jute into little fringy pieces. Now, if you wanted to get really creative here, instead of adding a hat to your snowmen, you could use some ribbon or some felt or some fleece, and you could add scarves. You could do whatever you'd like. And you can decorate these in any style that you choose to. To finish this one off, I'm just going to use a little bow and glue it on the top. Now keep in mind, these make really great tree ornaments, but because they are flatter, I think it would look really cute if you put these on some of the gifts that you're giving this year. You could tie them right onto your packages. Some of these wood shapes that you can find at the Dollar Tree have a nice big surface on them that you would be able to write on them, and I thought that would be a great way to make some handmade gift tags. I'm using the ones that are shaped like stockings, but I think the larger Christmas trees and also the bells would be really great for gift tags too. I'm just painting these how you would normally see a stocking. I did the body of the stocking with some red paint, and then the cuff of the stocking at the top I did with some white paint. For an extra touch of embellishment, I had this white pom-pom trim in my stash, and I noticed that 3 pom-poms fit really well across the top of my stocking, so using just a little line of hot glue, I was able to glue that trim in place. I had this to and from stamp in my stash that I got from Hobby Lobby a while ago, but I did see that they have the same stamp on Amazon, so I'll make sure I link that below in case you're interested in one. Now I'm using the Stays On ink here. If you're not really familiar with ink pads, the Stays On ink is more of a permanent ink. It doesn't come off with just water, so I thought this would be a great place to use it. When you're filling out your gift tags, you could use a Sharpie, or you probably could even use a gel pen to fill out the to and from. And another idea I had was, if I'm giving this as a gift, is to write the year on it also. That way whoever you're giving it to, not only do they have a really cute handmade tag for their package, but then they can take the same tag and hang it on their Christmas tree, and they'll always know who gave it to them and what the year was. To finish mine off, I'm just using some thin green ribbon, and I strung it through the top so that I would be able to tie it to my package. Thanks so much for coming to hang out with me again today. Let me know in the comments what kinds of things you're planning on crafting for this Christmas. All right, everyone, I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.